Act 1. The door opens. Why Jung matters to Persona. Welcome. Get comfortable. Let the day fade away. Tonight, we're going to explore something curious, something deep, but gentle. We're going to wander through the connection between a video game series you may love and the mind of a Swiss psychiatrist who changed how we think about ourselves. There's no rush. We have all the time we need. Let's begin with something simple, something foundational. Carl Jung's analytical psychology directly inspires the Persona series in terminology, themes, and character arcs. When you hear the word persona in the game, you're hearing Jung's voice echo across decades. He used that exact term to describe the masks we wear in social life, the faces we show the world to navigate our daily existence. The developers didn't stumble upon this word by accident. They built an entire world around Jung's vocabulary, his framework, his understanding of the human soul. But here's what makes this special. Persona doesn't just reference Jung, doesn't just drop his name in a loading screen or an Easter egg. No. Persona turns psychology into a playable system. Think about that for a moment. The abstract theories Jung spent his lifetime developing, ideas about the self, about shadow, about transformation, these become mechanics you can interact with. You summon aspects of your psyche. You confront inner demons that manifest as physical threats. Psychology becomes tangible, interactive, something you experience rather than simply read about. Now, to understand why this works so beautifully, we need to understand something Jung believed deeply. Jung believed myth and symbols were not fiction, but expressions of the psyche. To him, the old stories, the gods and monsters and heroes, weren't simply entertaining tales our ancestors told around fires. They were maps. They were the psyche speaking in the only language it truly knows, the language of image and archetype. Dragons weren't just dragons. They were something inside us, something universal, something true in a way that transcends literal reality. The Persona games understand this instinctively. Persona treats inner psychology as something that can literally reshape reality. In these games, your mental state isn't a metaphor for power. It is the power. When you grow psychologically, when you face your inner truth, when you integrate the rejected parts of yourself, you don't just feel better. You literally become stronger. The world itself responds to your inner transformation. This is Jung's vision made interactive. His belief that psychic reality is as real as physical reality, perhaps more so. And this brings us to something remarkable about the series' cultural impact. The series acts as a pop cultural gateway into Jungian ideas. Millions of people, many of them young, many who would never pick up a psychology textbook, have absorbed concepts like the shadow, the collective unconscious, and individuation through gameplay. They've lived these ideas through story and choice and consequence. Persona has done something academics dream of, made complex psychological theory accessible, even entertaining, without dumbing it down. The games are clever about this, too. They don't hide their influences. Classroom lectures in the games explicitly introduce Jungian concepts. Your character sits at a school desk, and a teacher stands at a blackboard, explaining shadows, explaining personas, explaining the architecture of the psyche. It's educational, but it never feels like a lecture because you sense that what's being taught will matter. That soon, very soon, you'll need this knowledge. And here's the brilliance of it. Theory is immediately tested through lived experience, echoing Jung's method. Jung wasn't interested in abstract philosophy disconnected from life. He wanted to understand the psyche through encounter, through the actual experience of his patients, through his own inner journey. The Persona games follow this exact structure. Learn the concept in class, then walk into a dungeon where that concept manifests. Face your shadow in dialogue, then face it in battle. The lesson becomes a living truth. This is why Jung matters to Persona. This is why the connection runs so deep. It's not superficial borrowing. It's a genuine translation of one medium into another. Jung gave us a map of the inner world. Persona lets us walk that map, explore its territories, and face its challenges. Both sought the same thing: transformation through confrontation with the self. So as we continue tonight, as we explore fact after fact, connection after connection, remember this foundation. Remember that what we're really discussing is how a video game became a mirror, how pixels and code created space for the ancient process of becoming whole, how a Swiss doctor's lifetime of work found new life in a Japanese RPG series that asks you, again and again, to know yourself. Let that settle. Breathe. We've opened the door. Now we step through. Act 2. Masks we wear, persona, ego, and identity. Let's talk about something we all do every single day, often without realizing it. Let's talk about the masks we wear. Jung's persona is the social mask used to function in society. Picture this. You wake up in the morning. Perhaps you're still yourself in those quiet moments, unguarded, authentic. But then you dress, prepare, and step out into the world. At work, you become the professional. With friends, you shift into another version of yourself. With family, yet another. None of these are lies exactly. They're adaptations. They're the faces we've learned to present so we can move through the world without constant friction. Jung called this the persona, and he understood it wasn't optional. We need these masks. Society requires them. But here's where it gets complicated, where Jung's insight deepens. Over-identifying with a persona can leave a person hollow or lost. Imagine wearing a mask for so long that you forget it's a mask. You start to believe that the professional facade is who you truly are. The dutiful child becomes your entire identity. The tough exterior hardens until you can't remember what's underneath anymore. Jung saw this happen again and again in his practice. People who had successfully navigated society's demands, who wore their masks beautifully, but who felt empty inside, who looked in the mirror and didn't recognize themselves, who had sacrificed their authentic self on the altar of social acceptance. And the truth is even more layered than that. Jung believed people carry multiple personae for different roles. Not just one mask, but a whole collection. The mask you wear at a funeral differs from the one you wear at a party. The self you present to authority differs from the self you show to children. We're constantly switching, adjusting, recalibrating. It's exhausting when you think about it, but it's also necessary. It's how we navigate the incredible complexity of human social life. Now, watch how Persona the game series transforms this psychological reality into gameplay. Persona's social sim systems mirror these shifting roles. During the day, you attend school. You choose how to present yourself in different situations. Do you study quietly, reinforcing one aspect of your identity? Do you engage socially, developing another? Each interaction asks you to perform a role, to be what that moment requires. The student, the friend, the confidant. You're constantly negotiating who you need to be in each context, just as Jung described. But here's where the games add their own twist, their own interpretation of Jung's framework. The protagonist's ability to change personas reflects flexible identity. In most JRPGs, you're who you are. Your character has fixed abilities, a fixed role. But in Persona, specifically with the protagonist, you can shift. You can summon different personas, different archetypal masks, depending on what the situation demands. You're a trickster one moment, a healer the next, a warrior after that. Your identity is fluid, adaptable, and multiple. And this is fascinating because, unlike Jung's cautionary view, the series reframes flexibility as strength. Jung worried about people losing themselves in their masks. But Persona asks, what if the ability to wear many masks, to shift between identities consciously and deliberately, is actually a form of power? What if understanding that you contain multitudes, that you're not just one fixed thing, makes you more whole rather than less? The wild card ability, the protagonist's signature trait, isn't a problem to be solved. It's their greatest asset. It's what makes them special. The games make this concrete in a way that's hard to forget. Masks in Persona become both symbolism and game mechanics. You're not just metaphorically wearing masks. You're literally collecting them, fusing them, strengthening them, choosing which one to wear in battle. The abstract becomes tangible. The psychological becomes mechanical. And in that translation, something clicks. Players understand intuitively that identity is constructed, negotiated, performed. That we choose who we are in each moment, even when it doesn't feel like a choice. Nowhere is this more stylishly executed than in the most recent entry. Persona 5 literalizes masks as stylish tools of rebellion. When the phantom thieves awaken to their power, they rip masks from their faces, and blood flows. It's theatrical, dramatic, even a bit shocking. But what does it mean? It means that accessing your true power requires tearing away the comfortable social mask. It requires acknowledging the gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. The pain of that tearing, that blood, represents the cost of authenticity. It hurts to stop pretending. But on the other side of that pain is liberation, power, and truth. And look at who the heroes fight against. Look at the antagonists, the corrupt adults, the systems of control. Antagonists often hide corruption behind rigid public roles. The respectable teacher who abuses students. The celebrated artist who exploits his models. The prosecutor who perverts justice. The politician who manipulates for personal gain. Each one wears a pristine public mask, a persona so convincing that society celebrates them. But underneath, rot, cruelty, emptiness. They've over-identified with their public roles so completely that they've lost any authentic core. They are only the mask, and the mask is a lie. This is Jung's warning, made manifest in narrative form. This is what happens when the persona becomes a prison rather than a tool. The villains of Persona aren't evil because they wear masks. We all wear masks. They're evil because they've forgotten they're wearing one. Because they've let the mask consume everything else, leaving only a hollow performance where a human being should be. The heroes, by contrast, know their masks are masks. They choose them consciously. They can remove them. They can change them. They remain connected to something underneath, something authentic, something true. And that's what gives them power against corruption and control. So we wear masks. All of us. Every day. The question Jung asked, the question Persona asks, isn't whether we'll wear them. It's whether we'll remember we're wearing them. Whether we'll keep something real underneath. Whether we'll let our masks serve us, or whether we'll serve our masks. Think about the masks you wore today. Think about which ones felt true and which ones felt like lies. There's no judgment here, just awareness, just noticing. That's where the work begins. Rest now. Let these ideas drift through your mind. We'll continue soon. Act 3. Descent into the shadow. Now we go deeper. Now we enter the part of Jung's work that unsettles people, the part we'd rather not think about. Now we descend into the shadow. Jung's shadow contains repressed fears, desires, and traits. Imagine everything about yourself you'd rather not acknowledge. The petty jealousies you don't want to admit. The selfish impulses you push down. The anger you pretend isn't there. The desires that embarrass you. The weaknesses you hide even from yourself. All of it, every rejected fragment, every denied aspect, sinks down into the unconscious. But it doesn't disappear. It accumulates. It grows. It becomes what Jung called the shadow, the dark counterpart to our conscious identity, the repository of everything we've decided we're not allowed to be. And here's what makes the shadow so dangerous, so insidious. People project their shadow onto others without realizing it. You've seen this happen. Someone who denies their own greed becomes obsessed with calling others greedy. Someone who represses their own desires condemns those desires in everyone around them. Someone who can't accept their own weakness attacks weakness wherever they perceive it. We throw our shadow outward, casting it on other people, seeing in them what we refuse to see in ourselves. And we genuinely believe we're seeing something objective, something true about them, when really we're just looking at our own reflection in their face. The Persona games understand this mechanism deeply. Persona externalizes the shadow as hostile beings and dungeons. What Jung described as internal psychological reality becomes, in the games, actual monsters you must fight. Literal dark versions of characters that attack you. Twisted dungeons born from someone's repressed psyche made manifest in another realm. It's not subtle. It's not metaphorical. The shadow is right there, confronting you, forcing you to deal with it or die. This is interactive psychology at its most visceral. And nowhere is this more perfectly executed than in the fourth game. Persona makes projection literal through rumors and denial. The Midnight Channel shows people what they want to see, what they expect to see, what their own shadows tell them is there. A character appears on the screen, but what you see isn't really them. It's the rumor about them, the projection, the collective shadow the town has cast upon them. And then, within that projected image, the character's own shadow awakens, fed by denial, growing stronger the more they refuse to look at themselves honestly. The visual design tells you everything. Shadows often appear grotesque or exaggerated, reflecting repression. They're distorted, monstrous, amplified beyond recognition. A character's insecurity becomes a towering beast. Their hidden desires manifest as something obscene. Their fear twists into nightmare shapes. Why? Because that's what repression does. When you refuse to acknowledge something about yourself, when you push it down and deny it, it doesn't stay proportional. It festers. It grows in the dark. It becomes more than it ever needed to be. The monster isn't the truth. The monster is what the truth becomes when you refuse to look at it. Jung was very clear about this process, very honest about what it required. Jung stressed shadow confrontation is painful but necessary. There's no gentle way to meet your shadow. There's no comfortable integration. You must look at the parts of yourself you despise. You must acknowledge desires you find shameful. You must accept capacities you thought you didn't have, including the capacity for cruelty, for selfishness, for weakness. It hurts. It feels like death sometimes, the death of who you thought you were. But Jung insisted, this confrontation is the only path to wholeness. You cannot be complete while you're at war with half of yourself. Watch how this plays out in the game's most powerful moments. Characters initially reject or deny their shadows. That's not me, they shout. You're lying. They fight against it, sometimes literally. They refuse to recognize themselves in that distorted mirror. And this rejection gives the shadow power, makes it stronger, more dangerous. As long as you fight against it, it fights back harder. As long as you deny it, it grows larger. The boss battle is really a battle against acceptance, against the unbearable truth of your own complexity. But then comes the turning point, the moment of transformation that makes these scenes unforgettable. Growth only occurs when they accept. That is also me. Not that is all of me, but that is also me. The admission that yes, beneath the mask, beneath the persona, there is weakness. There is fear. There is ugliness. There are things I don't want to be true, but they are true. And when that acceptance happens, when the character stops fighting and starts acknowledging, the shadow transforms. The monster becomes a persona. The enemy becomes an ally. The rejected becomes integrated. This is individuation, Jung's term for becoming whole, condensed into a single dramatic moment. And here's something crucial that gets overlooked, something Jung himself emphasized. The shadow includes positive qualities as well as negative ones. We don't just repress ugliness. Sometimes we repress beauty. Sometimes we deny our own strength because it frightens us or doesn't match who we think we should be. Sometimes we hide our creativity, our passion, our power. The shadow contains everything we've rejected, and not all of it deserves rejection. Some of it is exactly what we need to reclaim. The games show this beautifully through their long-form character development. Social links show characters reclaiming buried strengths. As you spend time with these characters, as you support them through their struggles, you watch them slowly retrieve parts of themselves they'd lost or hidden. The artist who forgot why they loved art. The athlete who buried their vulnerability. The student who denied their anger. Through relationships, through acceptance, through being witnessed in their wholeness, they become more themselves. Not different people, more complete versions of who they always were. This is the shadow work Jung devoted his life to exploring. This is the descent we must all make if we want to be whole. Down into the parts of ourselves we've locked away. Down into the fear and shame and desire and weakness and strength we couldn't carry in our conscious lives. The Persona series makes this journey literal, makes it visible, makes it something you can experience rather than just contemplate. And maybe that's why these games resonate so deeply with people. Maybe we recognize our own shadows in these exaggerated, monstrous forms. Maybe we see our own denials in these characters' initial rejections. Maybe we feel the relief and terror of that moment of acceptance. That is also me. The shadow is waiting. It's always been waiting. Not to destroy you, but to complete you. Not to take over, but to be acknowledged. Jung knew this. Persona knows this. And somewhere, deep down, you know this too. Let that truth settle into the quiet. Let exist without judgment. The shadow is not your enemy. It's the part of yourself you haven't met yet. Breathe. Rest. The descent continues, but there's no rush. We have time. We have all the time we need. Act 4. The Inner Guide and the Velvet Room. There's a space between consciousness and the unconscious. A threshold. A meeting place. Jung spent years trying to describe it, to map it, to understand what happens in that liminal zone where the ego meets the deeper psyche. And he discovered something remarkable. We're not alone there. Jung described inner guides mediating between ego and unconscious. In his own psychological journey, in his patient's dreams, in myths and fairy tales across cultures, the same pattern emerged. When someone ventures into the depths of their own psyche, they encounter figures who seem to exist independently. Wise old men, mysterious women, tricksters, teachers, guides who offer cryptic advice, who challenge, who lead the way deeper. Jung understood these weren't just fantasies or hallucinations. They were autonomous aspects of the psyche itself, messengers from the unconscious, helping the conscious mind navigate waters it wasn't built to understand alone. The early Persona games made this explicit in ways that still astonish. Filament directly references Jung's ideas as a guiding figure. A butterfly, golden and serene, who appears to characters and offers them a gift. The power of persona, the ability to face their inner world and survive it. He speaks of the unconscious. He speaks of potential. He represents the benevolent aspect of the psyche, the part that wants growth, that seeks wholeness, that believes in human capacity for transformation. He is, quite literally, the helpful inner guide Jung described, translated into narrative form with almost no disguise. But Jung understood something crucial about the psyche. It contains opposites. For every benevolent force, there's a destructive counterpart. For every impulse toward growth, there's a pull toward dissolution. And the games understood this too. Nyarlathotep embodies humanity's destructive, unconscious potential. The dark opposite of Philemon, he represents everything in the collective unconscious that seeks chaos, that feeds on fear and hatred, that wants to drag consciousness back down into undifferentiated darkness. He's not evil in a simple sense. He's the shadow of humanity itself, the accumulated darkness of every denied impulse, every act of cruelty, every moment we chose destruction over creation. Together, they represent dual psychic forces: creation and destruction, growth and regression, the impulse toward individuation and the temptation of dissolution. Jung saw these polarities everywhere in the psyche, understood that both are always present, always in tension. The question isn't which one exists. Both exist. The question is which one we feed, which one we serve, which one guides our choices. Philemon and Nyarlathotep aren't fighting over humanity. They're showing humanity what it's fighting within itself. But for most players, the inner guide that matters most, the one they return to again and again, exists in a very particular place: the Velvet Room. It functions as an inner psychic chamber. Think about it. You can't bring anyone else there. You arrive alone, always alone. It exists outside normal time and space, between dream and reality, accessible only to those on the journey of transformation. Its appearance shifts from game to game, elevator to limousine to prison, but its essence remains constant. It's the place between, the threshold space where the conscious ego can safely work with unconscious material. And what happens there is pure Jungian process made tangible. Personas are fused and transformed there. You take aspects of the psyche, archetypal patterns, and combine them. You sacrifice some to create others. You strengthen them through understanding, through connection, through the relationships you've built in the outer world. It's alchemy, the same alchemical imagery Jung spent decades interpreting as a metaphor for psychological transformation. Base material becomes gold. Separate elements combine into something new. The fragmented becomes whole through conscious work and inner fire. Who facilitates this process? Who tends this sacred space? Igor and attendants act as agents of the self-archetype. Igor, with his peculiar appearance, his cryptic warnings, his genuine care hidden behind unsettling features. The attendants, often named after characters from Frankenstein, a story itself about creation and monstrosity, about what happens when we dare to reshape existence. They're not human. They're not quite spirits. There's something else, something that exists to serve the process of individuation itself. In Jung's framework, the self is the central organizing archetype, the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious. Igor and his assistants serve that self, facilitate its emergence, guide the ego toward it without controlling the process. Listen to what Igor says when you arrive. He speaks of contracts and destiny, but also of choice and potential. He acknowledges the journey ahead, the trials coming, but he never tells you what to do. He provides tools, offers insights, but respects your autonomy. This is exactly how Jung understood the self to operate. It guides but doesn't dominate. It provides what's needed for growth, but demands active participation. You must choose to engage. You must do the work yourself. And notice when you're called there. Each visit marks readiness for psychological growth. You don't go to the Velvet Room randomly. You're summoned at thresholds, at moments of significance, when something in you is ready to transform. When you've built enough connections, gathered enough experience, faced enough truth. The door appears when you're ready to walk through it, not before. This mirrors Jung's understanding of psychological development. It unfolds according to its own timetable. You can't force it. You can't rush it. But when the time is right, when the psyche is ready, the opportunity presents itself. The Velvet Room never judges you. Igor never condemns your choices, even when he questions them. The attendants offer guidance, not commands. There's something deeply compassionate about this space, something that honors your autonomy even while supporting your transformation. It's a safe container for dangerous work, a sanctuary in the midst of psychological chaos. Jung talked about the importance of such containers, such teminos, sacred protected spaces where transformation can occur without being overwhelmed by unconscious forces. In later games, the Velvet Room's form reflects the protagonist's psychological state. A prison when you're trapped by false accusations and societal judgment. A limousine when you're on a moving journey with a fixed destination. Each manifestation tells you something about the inner landscape, about what kind of transformation is needed, about what constraints or freedoms define this particular path. But always it remains the place between. The inner sanctum where ego and unconscious can meet safely. Where the guides dwell who serve your wholeness. Where the work of integration, of fusion, of transformation happens through conscious engagement with unconscious material. Jung would visit this place in his active imagination sessions, descending into what he called his inner depths, encountering figures who taught him, challenged him, showed him aspects of himself he couldn't see alone. The Velvet Room is that practice made concrete, that inner chamber given form and character and ritual. It's where you go to do the great work of becoming whole. And perhaps that's why it feels sacred, why the music there is always haunting and beautiful, why leaving always feels like a small death, a return to a simpler but lesser world. Because for those moments inside, you're in direct contact with the process of your own becoming. You're not just playing a game. You're engaging with the ancient work of soul-making, guided by figures who exist only to serve that transformation. The Velvet Room is always there, just beyond perception, waiting for you to be ready. Igor is always patient. The work is always available. All you have to do is accept the contract, enter the space, and begin. Rest here for a moment. Let the image of that blue room fill your mind. Let yourself imagine entering it, sitting down, beginning the work. There's no urgency. The guides are patient. They've been waiting for you. They'll wait as long as you need. Breathe. Settle. The journey continues, but first, we rest in this sacred space between. Act 5, Individuation, Becoming Whole. We talked about masks. We've descended into shadow. We've met the guides who dwell in the depths. Now we arrive at the center, the purpose, the reason Jung devoted his life to exploring the psyche. Now we talk about becoming whole. Jung called individuation the process of becoming one's true self. Not the self society wants you to be. Not the self your parents expected. Not the persona you've constructed to survive. Your true self. The totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, integrated and alive. Jung believed this was the fundamental task of human existence, especially in the second half of life. To gather all the scattered fragments, all the rejected pieces, all the potential you've been carrying, and bring them together into wholeness. To become, finally and fully, yourself. And this isn't just background philosophy for the Persona series. This is the structure, the skeleton, the beating heart of everything. Persona 3, 4, and 5 are structured around individuation. Each game takes a protagonist from fragmentation to wholeness, from unconsciousness to awareness, from isolation to integration. The journey is always the same in essence, even as the details differ. You begin incomplete, surrounded by others who are also incomplete. And through facing shadow, building connections, confronting truth, you and your companions gradually become whole. The entire arc, from opening scene to final battle, is Jung's individuation process made into narrative. At the center of this process, Jung identified a particular archetype. The self-archetype represents psychic wholeness, not the ego, that small conscious part of you that thinks it's in control. The self is larger, deeper, the totality of conscious and unconscious, the organizing principle of the entire psyche. Jung sometimes called it the God image within, not because it's literally divine, but because it functions as the center and circumference of psychological existence. It's what you're becoming, the wholeness you're moving toward through the individuation process. Watch how the games translate this into mechanics. Stronger personas emerge through self-integration. As you face your shadow, as you build genuine connections, as you grow in understanding, your personas evolve. Not through grinding battles, not through accumulating experience points alone, but through psychological development. The ultimate personas, the final forms, emerge only when integration is nearly complete. When you've done the inner work, when you've faced what needed facing. The power isn't external. It's the natural result of becoming whole. The games give you a map for this journey, a structure borrowed from Western mysticism but perfectly aligned with Jung's psychology. The Fool's journey mirrors psychological development. In tarot, the Fool begins at 0, innocent and unaware, about to step off a cliff into the unknown. Then comes a journey through all the other major arcana, each one representing a stage, a lesson, a necessary encounter. The magician's conscious will, the high priestess's intuition, the emperor's structure, the hanged man's necessary surrender, death's transformation, the tower's destruction of false beliefs, until finally the world completion, integration, return. Jung loved the tarot. He saw in it a symbolic map of individuation, a sequence of psychological stages that people naturally move through when they engage seriously with the work of becoming whole. And the Persona games understood this connection perfectly. Tarot arcana maps stages of individuation. Each arcana represents not just a card, but a psychological phase, an archetypal pattern, a particular kind of lesson the psyche must learn. You don't move through them in strict order because psychological development isn't linear. But over time, through engagement with all of them, wholeness emerges. And here's the genius of how the games implement this understanding. Social links act as lessons within each archetype. Each person you bond with embodies an arcana. The magician, often your friend learning to master their will. The chariot, someone struggling with determination and control. The tower, a person whose world is collapsing and must be rebuilt. Through relationships with them, through witnessing their struggles and supporting their growth, you learn what that archetype means. You don't just read about the Empress energy. You help someone embody it, work through its shadow, integrate its gifts. The reciprocity is built into the system. Improving bonds strengthens personas. As your relationships deepen, as you truly connect with others, the personas of that arcana become more powerful. This isn't arbitrary. It's psychological truth made mechanical. Jung understood that individuation doesn't happen in isolation. We become whole through encounters with others, through relationships, through the mirror others provide. Your growth strengthens your psychic forces. Your connections literally make you more capable, more complete. And something crucial happens through this process. something Jung observed again and again in his practice. Emotional patterns become conscious, freeing psychic energy. So much of our energy is locked up in unconscious patterns, in repressions, in conflicts we won't acknowledge. We're constantly working to keep things buried, to maintain our personas, to avoid facing our shadows. It's exhausting, even though we don't realize it. But when we make the unconscious conscious, when we face what we've been hiding and integrate it, that energy is freed. We become more alive, more present, more capable. Not because we've gained something new, but because we've stopped wasting energy on internal warfare. The games show this beautifully through party member development. When characters face their shadows and integrate them, they don't just get new powers. They become more themselves, more vibrant, more capable of genuine connection. The energy they were using to maintain denial becomes available for life, for creativity, for authentic engagement with the world. Each game structures its particular journey differently, but the pattern remains. Persona 3 focuses on accepting death as part of life, on finding meaning in finitude. Persona 4 emphasizes confronting truth, especially uncomfortable truths about yourself and others. Persona 5 centers on rebellion and freedom, on refusing to let society's false narratives define you. But underneath these different emphases, the same process, individuation, becoming whole, integrating shadow, building genuine connections, moving from fragmentation to unity. The final battles make this explicit. You don't defeat the ultimate antagonist through simple power. You defeat them through wholeness. Through the integration you've achieved, the connections you've built, the truth you've faced. The power of the wild card, the protagonist's unique ability, is really the power of individuation itself. The ability to hold contradictions, to embrace multiplicity, to remain centered while shifting forms. To be, simultaneously, yourself and more than yourself. Jung believed individuation was the work of a lifetime, that most people never complete it, never even seriously begin it, that it requires courage, honesty, and sustained effort. But he also believed it was the only path to genuine psychological health, to authentic meaning, to a life fully lived. The Persona series takes that lifetime work and condenses it into a year. A school year, a calendar, a measured sequence of days where every choice matters. It's artificial, of course. Real individuation can't be rushed, but the compression serves a purpose. It lets you experience the arc, feel the transformation, and understand the process. And maybe, just maybe, it plants seeds for your own journey toward wholeness. Because that's what we're really talking about. Not just characters in a game, not just Jung's theories in a textbook, but you, your own fragmentation, your own shadows, your own potential for wholeness. The Fool's Journey is your journey, if you choose to take it. The arcana are stages you'll move through, patterns you'll encounter. The social links are the real relationships in your life, the mirrors and teachers and companions who help you become whole. Individuation is possible. Wholeness is not just a fantasy. The scattered pieces can come together. The war within can end. You can become, fully and finally, yourself. Jung promised this. The games illustrate it. And somewhere deep inside, you already know it's true. Let that possibility rest in you. Not as pressure, not as obligation, but as simple truth. You can become whole. The journey is available. The process is real. And every step toward integration, every shadow faced, every genuine connection made, brings you closer to the self you've always been becoming. Rest now. Let wholeness be a presence, not a pressure. Let it simply exist as a possibility, waiting patiently for you to begin or to continue, or to remember where you are on the path. The fool steps forward. The journey continues, and you are exactly where you need to be. Act 6. Love, anima, and inner opposites. There's a particular kind of encounter that changes everything. A moment when you meet someone and feel something stir in you that you can't quite name. Recognition without understanding. Fascination that feels both thrilling and dangerous. Jung spent years trying to understand what happens in these moments, what we're really responding to when someone captivates us so completely. And what he discovered was both beautiful and unsettling. Jung's anima and animus represent inner opposites. Every person, Jung argued, contains within them the qualities of the opposite gender. Not in a biological sense, but psychologically, archetypally. A man carries within his unconscious a feminine image, the anima. A woman carries within her unconscious a masculine image, the animus. These aren't stereotypes exactly, though they're shaped by culture. They're the psyche's way of holding what consciousness rejects, of containing the qualities we've decided don't belong to our gender identity. The sensitive man represses his feeling nature, and it becomes his anima. The rational woman suppresses her aggressive drive, and it becomes her animus. The opposite within, always present, always active, always influencing us from the shadows. The Persona series plays with this constantly, weaving it into the very fabric of how personas manifest. Personas often take opposite gender or androgynous forms. Male characters summon female deities. Female characters command male demons. The wild card protagonist shifts between masculine and feminine archetypal forms with equal ease. The message is clear. Your power, your psychic wholeness, requires embracing what you've been taught doesn't belong to you. The warrior must access the nurturer. The caregiver must claim the destroyer. Gender becomes fluid in the realm of personas because the psyche itself contains all possibilities. And these inner figures aren't just decoration. They aren't just interesting mythology. They act as bridges to unconscious insight. When you engage with the anima or animus, when you acknowledge the opposite within, you gain access to parts of the psyche the conscious ego can't reach alone. The anima carries a man's feeling function, his capacity for relationship, his connection to the unconscious depths. The animus carries a woman's capacity for logos, for meaning-making, for decisive action. Through relationship with these inner opposites, Jung believed we become more complete, more capable, more whole. But here's where it gets complicated, where Jung's insight becomes almost uncomfortable in its accuracy. Romantic attraction often reflects anima or animus projection. You meet someone and you're overwhelmed by fascination, by a sense that this person is perfect, is everything you've been looking for, completes you in ways you can't articulate. What's really happening? You're seeing your own anima or animus reflected in them. You're projecting your inner opposite onto this external person and then falling in love with your own projection. They become a carrier for parts of yourself you haven't integrated, haven't even met yet. The intensity you feel isn't really about them. It's about you encountering yourself, disguised as another person. This is why early romance often feels so magical and why it so often leads to disillusionment. You fall in love with the projection, with the perfect image you've cast onto someone. And then, inevitably, you begin to see them as they actually are. Flawed, human, different from the image. And if you haven't done the work of integration, if you haven't begun to own your anima or animus as part of yourself, the relationship collapses under the weight of disappointed projection. The games understand this dynamic with remarkable sophistication. Confidant routes explore projection versus real connection. In the early stages of a romantic social link, there's often idealization. The character seems perfect or troubled in ways that make you want to save them, or mysterious in ways that invite projection. But as the route deepens, as you spend more time with them, something shifts. You begin to see them clearly. Their flaws, their struggles, their humanity. The projection starts to fade. And here's where the route becomes psychologically true. You have a choice. You can hold on to the projection and can keep trying to make them fit the image. This leads to stagnation, to relationships that feel hollow because they're not based on seeing the other person truly. Where you can let the projection go, can meet them as they actually are, can build something real on the foundation of genuine seeing rather than fantasy. The game doesn't always make this explicit, but it's there in the structure, in the choices offered, in the way some routes deepen into authentic intimacy while others remain shallow. Player choice invites reflection on authenticity in relationships. Who are you actually connecting with? The real person or your image of them? Are you listening to what they're actually saying or hearing what you want to hear? Are you falling in love with them or with how they make you feel about yourself? The game can't force you to ask these questions, but it creates space for them. It shows you the difference between projection and presence, between fantasy and genuine encounter. And there's something deeper happening through these romantic routes, something Jungian to the core. As you engage with these characters, as you support them and witness them and choose how to relate to them, you're also engaging with your own anima or animus. You're learning what it means to relate to the opposite within. The romance happening on screen mirrors an internal process, an integration happening in the depths. You're not just helping a character grow. You're learning something about your own capacity for relationship, about what you project and what you genuinely see, about how to bridge the gap between your conscious identity and the opposite that dwells within. Jung was clear that integration of anima or animus was essential to individuation. You cannot become whole while you're at war with the opposite within. And you cannot have genuine relationships while you're projecting your inner opposite onto everyone you're attracted to. The work is to withdraw the projections, to recognize that the quality I see in them actually lives in me. That fascination I feel is my own unlived potential calling to be integrated. That perfection I seek in another is really the wholeness I need to build within myself. This doesn't mean romance is impossible or that attraction is always false. It means that mature love, the kind that sustains and nourishes and allows two people to be genuinely themselves together, requires seeing clearly. It requires recognizing projection for what it is and choosing to look past it to the actual person standing before you. And it requires doing the internal work of integration, of claiming the opposite within, so you're not desperately seeking in another what you refuse to develop in yourself. The games are surprisingly honest about this. Some routes stay shallow, remain fantasies, give you what you want to see rather than what's true. But the best routes, the ones that resonate years later, show you characters in their full humanity. Flawed, struggling real, and they invite you to choose. Will you love the projection or will you love the person? Will you use this relationship to avoid your own growth? Or will you let it mirror and support the integration happening within? There's a moment in many confidant routes, a turning point where the character reveals something that contradicts your image of them, something that makes them less perfect, less idealized. This is the moment of truth. Do you reject them for failing to match your projection? Or do you meet them in their reality and discover that the real person is more interesting, more worthy of genuine connection than the fantasy ever was? Jung believed that recognizing and withdrawing projections was some of the hardest psychological work a person could do, Because projections feel true. They feel like insight, like recognition, like love. Letting them go feels like loss, feels like disillusionment. But on the other side of that loss is the possibility of something real. Relationships based not on what you need the other person to be, but on who they actually are. And integration based not on seeking your opposite in another, but on claiming it within yourself. The anima and animus wait within. The opposite that completes you, that bridges you to the unconscious, that carries the qualities your conscious identity has rejected. You can seek them forever in other people, falling in love with your own reflection again and again. Or you can turn inward, can meet them directly, can begin the work of integration that makes you whole and makes genuine relationships possible. The Persona games don't preach this. They just create space for it, offer choices that reflect it, show you characters navigating it. The rest is up to you, in the game and in your life. The projections are yours to recognize. The integration is yours to do. The choice between fantasy and reality, between projection and genuine seeing, is always, finally, yours. Rest with this. Think about the people you've been drawn to. Think about what you saw in them and whether you were really seeing them at all. There's no judgment here, just awareness, just the beginning of recognition, just the first step toward withdrawing projection and building something real. The opposite within waits patiently. The real people in your life wait to be seen as they are. And wholeness waits on the other side of this recognition, this integration, this choice to see truly. Breathe. Let's settle. The journey continues, always deeper, always more real. Act 7. Shared minds, the collective unconscious. Until now, we've been talking about the individual psyche, your shadow, your persona, your journey toward wholeness. But Jung made a claim that seemed almost mystical, that challenged the way we think about consciousness itself. He said, "We're not as separate as we think we are." Jung proposed a collective unconscious shared by humanity. Beneath your personal unconscious, beneath your individual memories and repressions and experiences, there exists something deeper. A layer of the psyche that doesn't belong to you alone. A repository of patterns, images, and potentials that every human being carries, regardless of culture, regardless of personal history. The archetypes live there. The old myths echo there. The same symbols appear in dreams across continents, across centuries, because they emerge from this shared foundation of human consciousness. It's a radical idea. It suggests that at the deepest level, our minds are connected, not through some mystical force, but through shared structure, shared inheritance, the common psychological architecture of being human. When you dream of a wise old man, and someone in ancient China dreamed of a wise old man, and someone in medieval Europe dreamed of a wise old man, you're not copying each other. You're all drawing from the same deep well, the collective unconscious that contains the pattern of wise old man as a fundamental possibility of human experience. The Persona series takes this concept and makes it literal, makes it spatial, makes it something you can walk through and explore. Persona's otherworlds function as shared psychic spaces. The metaverse in Persona 5, the TV world in Persona 4, the dark hour in Persona 3. These aren't private internal spaces. Multiple people can enter them. What happens there affects more than just the individual who experiences it. They're collective spaces, shared psychological realms where individual minds overlap and interact in ways impossible in physical reality. Nowhere is this more explicit than in Persona 5's approach to the cognitive world. Mementos represents the mass unconscious, a sprawling subway system that goes down and down and down into depths that feel infinite. Random encounters with shadows that represent general human dysfunction, average distortions, the background noise of collective psychological damage. It's not anyone's personal unconscious. It's everyone's. It's the accumulated weight of societal repression, collective denial, the shared shadow of humanity itself. The deeper you go, the older the layers, the more fundamental the distortions. But within that collective space, individuals create their own domains. Palaces represent distorted personal psyches. When someone's distortion becomes extreme enough, when their personal psyche warps reality around them with sufficient force, they create a palace. A whole world shaped by their trauma, their desires, their twisted understanding of themselves and others. These are intensely personal spaces, even though they exist within the collective realm. A corrupted teacher's school becomes a castle where he rules as king. An artist's museum becomes a temple to his ego. Each palace is a window into one person's shadow made manifest and architectural. This two-tiered structure is pure Jung. The distinction mirrors Jung's personal versus collective unconscious. Palaces are the personal layer, the individual's unique psychological configuration, their particular wounds and distortions. Mementos is the collective layer, the shared foundation of human consciousness with all its accumulated shadows. And they're not separate, they're continuous. The palaces exist within mementos, emerge from it, are expressions of how personal psychology warps and distorts the collective foundation. The game gives you a physical metaphor for psychological depth that Jung would have appreciated. Subway descents symbolize going deeper into the psyche. You take a train down, level after level, into older and older strata of consciousness. The aesthetic shifts. The atmosphere grows heavier. You're not just going down into a subway system. You're descending through layers of consciousness itself, moving from the surface concerns of daily distortion down towards something more fundamental, more ancient, more collective. And here's what makes these worlds genuinely Jungian rather than just cosmetic. They're not fixed. They're not objective in the way physical reality is objective. World change as cognition shifts. When you change someone's heart, when you force them to confront their shadow and acknowledge their distortion, their palace collapses. It doesn't survive the shift in consciousness that created it. The distortion that held it in shape dissolves, and the palace dissolves with it. Reality itself is revealed as dependent on consciousness, on cognition, on how we perceive and interpret and project. This is Jung's insight made interactive. The psyche isn't just something that responds to reality. The psyche shapes reality, or at least shapes what we experience as reality. Change consciousness, and you change the world. Not metaphorically. Actually, the cognitive world responds to cognitive change because it is cognitive and is made of the same substance as thought and belief and perception. Think about what this means for understanding social reality. If mementos represents collective consciousness, then social problems aren't just out there in some objective external world. They're in here, in us, in the shared psychic space we all inhabit and co-create. Corruption isn't just bad people making bad choices. It's a distortion in the collective unconscious, a shadow that we all contribute to through our denial, our apathy, our projections. You can't fix it just by changing laws or removing individuals. You have to change cognition, have to shift the collective consciousness that makes such distortions possible. The games make this explicit in their final acts. The ultimate enemy is never just an individual. It's always something collective, something that emerges from humanity's shared consciousness. A god born from collective worship of death. a fog born from collective avoidance of truth, a false god born from collective desire to be controlled, to be relieved of the burden of freedom and responsibility. These aren't external threats. They're humanity's shadow made manifest, projections of the collective unconscious that have gained enough psychic energy to take on independent existence. And you can't defeat them through simple force. You defeat them through changing consciousness, through awakening people to truth, through shifting the collective cognition that gives these shadows power. The phantom thieves don't just fight. They change hearts, change minds, change the collective consciousness itself. They're doing collective shadow work, forcing society to face what it's been denying, to integrate what it's been projecting. Jung believed the collective unconscious wasn't just a repository of the past. It contained potentials, possibilities, seeds of future development. The archetypes aren't just old patterns. They're living possibilities, ways consciousness can organize itself, directions human development can take. The collective unconscious is both a burden and a gift, both the weight of everything humanity has been and the potential for everything humanity might become. The other worlds in Persona hold this same duality. They're spaces of danger, full of shadows and distortion. But they're also spaces of transformation, where change is possible in ways it isn't in physical reality, where you can confront shadows directly, where you can reshape cognition and watch reality shift in response, where the work of integration, personal and collective, can happen at a speed and depth impossible in ordinary consciousness. We are connected. At the deepest level, we share something. Not just biology, not just culture, but the very structure of consciousness itself. The same patterns move through all of us. The same archetypes wait in all of our depths. The same shadows accumulate in the collective spaces we share. And what one person does in that shared space affects everyone, ripples outward, changes the collective consciousness we all inhabit. This is both terrifying and hopeful. Terrifying because it means we're responsible not just for our own psyches, but for the collective consciousness we contribute to. Every denial, every projection, every refusal to face shadow adds to the collective shadow. Every distortion we refuse to address becomes part of the mementos we all must navigate. But hopeful because it means change is possible, because consciousness can shift, because facing your own shadow doesn't just heal you. It heals the collective. Every act of integration, personal or witnessed, every heart changed, every truth faced, shifts the shared psychic space we all inhabit. The Persona games invite you to feel this connection, to experience yourself as part of something larger. When you change a palace ruler's heart, you're not just saving that individual. You're shifting the collective consciousness that made their distortion possible. When you descend into mementos, you're not just exploring a dungeon. You're navigating the shared unconscious of humanity itself, facing shadows that belong to all of us. Jung spent his life trying to map the collective unconscious, to understand its structure, to help people recognize their connection to it. The Persona series makes that map playable and makes that connection visceral. You walk through the collective unconscious. You fight its shadows. You see how personal and collective psychology interweave, how individual distortion and social dysfunction feed each other, how change ripples outward from individual to collective and back again. We're not separate. We never were. Our minds touch at the deepest level, share foundations, draw from commonwealths. The collective unconscious is real, is present, is the shared psychic space we all inhabit whether we know it or not. And what you do there matters. Your integration matters. Your shadow work matters. Not just for you, but for everyone connected to you in that deep shared consciousness. Rest in that connection. Feel it if you can. You're not alone. Not really. At the deepest level, we're all navigating the same depths, facing the same patterns, working toward the same wholeness. The collective unconscious holds us all. And every step you take toward integration, toward truth, toward wholeness, is a step taken for everyone. Breathe. Let the connection exist without needing to understand it fully. You're part of something vast, and that vastness is part of you. The descent continues together, always together, into depths we share. Act 8. Archetypes made flesh. There are patterns that repeat. You've noticed them, even if you've never named them. The rebel who challenges authority. The sage who knows more than they say. The caregiver who gives until they have nothing left. These aren't just character types. They aren't just convenient shortcuts for storytelling. Jung believed they were something deeper, something fundamental to how human consciousness organizes experience. Jung described universal archetypes shaping behavior, not stereotypes learned from culture, though culture shapes how they manifest. Archetypes are patterns that precede culture, that emerge from the collective unconscious itself, that structure how we perceive and enact roles and relationships. The hero isn't just a story convention. It's a psychological pattern, a way consciousness organizes the journey of growth and challenge. The shadow isn't just a literary device. It's how the psyche holds what consciousness rejects. These patterns are real, are active, are shaping your behavior and perception right now, whether you recognize them or not. The Persona series makes these patterns visible, makes them characters you can meet and relate to and understand. Persona casts a map on a hero, sage, rebel, caregiver, and more. Each major character embodies an archetype, not in a shallow way, but deeply, complexly, showing you how that pattern plays out in actual human life. The protagonist is always the fool, the hero, the one on the journey of transformation. But around them, the full cast of archetypal patterns assembles, each one teaching something, each one reflecting a facet of human possibility. And these patterns don't just appear once. Minor archetypes recur across titles. The detective investigating truth, the young child representing innocence and potential, the older mentor who's been through their own journey, the rival who pushes you to grow through competition. Game after game, these patterns appear, always different in detail, but consistent in essence. Because the archetypes are consistent. They're not invented fresh each time. They're discovered, recognized, given new faces but ancient roles. Look at one of the most important archetypes, one Jung wrote about extensively. Tricksters destabilize rigid attitudes. The trickster appears in every mythology, every culture's stories. Coyote, Loki, Anansi, Hermes. They break rules, mock authority, and turn order into chaos. But they're not villains, not exactly. They're necessary, because consciousness needs to be destabilized sometimes, needs to have its certainties questioned, its rigid structures disrupted. The trickster keeps the psyche flexible and prevents it from hardening into fixed patterns that no longer serve. In Persona, the trickster characters stand out immediately. They're irreverent, often annoying, and they don't take anything seriously. But watch what happens as you spend time with them. Trickster characters later reveal depth and wisdom. Beneath the jokes and chaos, there's genuine insight. They saw through the pretense all along. They understood what others were too rigid to see. Their chaos wasn't random. It was strategic, necessary, preparing the way for transformation by breaking down what needed to break. Or consider another archetype, one Jung saw manifesting in many of his patients. Caregivers struggle with burnout. The caregiver archetype is beautiful, necessary, the impulse to nurture and support and give. But it carries a shadow. The caregiver who can't stop giving, who defines themselves entirely through others' needs, who burns themselves out in service. The Persona games show you this pattern compassionately. Characters who care so much they're destroying themselves. Those who need to learn that self-care isn't selfish, that you can't pour from an empty cup, that the caregiver must also be cared for. The authority archetypes appear with striking consistency, and often as obstacles. Father and authority archetypes dominate antagonists. The corrupt official, the abusive teacher, the controlling parent, the unjust system. These aren't random villain choices. They're archetypal patterns of authority gone wrong. The father energy turned destructive. Jung knew that authority archetypes could be benevolent or tyrannical, could provide structure or impose prison. The games explore primarily the shadow side of authority, showing you what happens when legitimate structure becomes rigid control, when protection becomes domination. The mother archetype appears with equal complexity. Mother archetypes nurture or imprison. The good mother who supports your growth. The devouring mother who can't let you individuate, who keeps you dependent, who loves you in ways that stunt your development. Both are mothers. Both emerge from the same archetypal pattern. The difference is in consciousness, in whether the archetype serves life or serves itself. The games show you both versions, helping you recognize that nurturing and smothering can wear the same face. Then there are the warrior archetypes appearing across the cast. Warrior archetypes embody a neutral force. The warrior isn't good or evil. It's directed energy, disciplined power, the capacity to fight for what matters. But warriors struggle with knowing when to fight and when to yield, with balancing strength and gentleness, with finding purpose beyond combat. You see this in the characters who start as pure fighters and must learn to access other parts of themselves, to become more than just their strength. And perhaps most tenderly explored, most relevant to young players navigating their own romantic awakenings. Lover archetypes evolve from infatuation to depth. The lover archetype isn't just about romance. It's about connection, passion, the capacity to be moved by beauty and desire. But it has stages. Early lover energy is all infatuation, projection, overwhelming feeling. Mature lover energy is conscious, grounded, able to see the beloved clearly while still choosing to love them. The confidant routes that work best show you this evolution. Take characters from crush to genuine connection, from fantasy to real relationship. What makes the Persona series remarkable isn't just that it uses archetypes. Many stories do that. It's that the games show you archetypes with psychological accuracy, with understanding of their light and shadow, with respect for their complexity. These aren't cardboard cutouts labeled hero and sage. They're full human characters wrestling with archetypal patterns, showing you how these universal forces play out in individual lives. And as you spend time with each character, as you deepen your social links, you're not just learning about them. You're learning about the archetype they embody. You're discovering what the caregiver needs, what the rebel is fighting for, what the sage knows, and what they still must learn. You're building relationships with the archetypal patterns themselves, gaining fluency in the language of the collective unconscious. Jung believed that recognizing archetypal patterns was crucial to psychological development. When you can name the pattern playing out in your life, you gain some freedom from it. When you recognize, oh, I'm caught in the caregiver pattern and burning out, you can make different choices. When you see this person is embodying the trickster, destabilizing my certainties, You can engage more consciously. The archetypes don't stop operating when you recognize them, but you stop being their unconscious puppet. You become their conscious participant. The games train you in this recognition. You meet the magician, the priestess, the empress, the emperor, the hierophant, the lovers, the chariot, justice, the hermit, fortune, strength, the hanged man, death, temperance, the devil, the tower, the star, the moon, the sun, judgment, the world. You spend time with each pattern, learn its lessons, see its shadows and gifts. And slowly, almost without realizing it, you become literate in the language of archetypes. You can recognize these patterns in your own life, in the people around you, in the situations you encounter. This is what Jung wanted, what he spent his career trying to teach. Not that you should think about archetypes intellectually, but that you should recognize them in lived experience, should understand that these patterns are active forces shaping your life and the lives of everyone around you. The hero's journey isn't just in movies. It's your journey whenever you face a challenge that demands growth. The shadow isn't just in games. It's the part of you that you meet when you stop running. The trickster isn't just a character type. It's the force that disrupts your plans at exactly the moment you most need disruption. The archetypes are always present, always active. They don't need your belief. They'll keep shaping behavior, keep organizing experience, keep manifesting in dreams and stories and relationships, whether you acknowledge them or not. But when you do acknowledge them, when you learn to recognize them, something shifts. You become more conscious, more able to work with these forces rather than being unconsciously driven by them, more able to see the patterns playing out and make choices within them. Persona makes the archetypes flesh. It makes them people you can talk to, fight beside, grow with. Makes them tangible enough to understand, complex enough to respect. And in doing so, it does what Jung hoped psychology could do. It makes the unconscious conscious. It brings the ancient patterns into the light where they can be seen, engaged with, integrated. You carry all these archetypes within you. Not just one, all of them. They're potential ways of being, patterns you can access depending on what life demands. Sometimes you need the warrior's discipline, the caregiver's compassion, the trickster's flexibility, the sage's wisdom. The archetypes are your inheritance, the psychological vocabulary of being human. Let them exist in you without judgment. Notice which ones you're comfortable with and which ones you avoid. Notice which characters in these games you're drawn to and which ones irritate you. The attraction and the irritation are both telling you something about which archetypal patterns you need to engage with, which parts of your psychological inheritance you need to claim. The patterns are ancient. The patterns are alive. The patterns are you, waiting to be recognized and integrated into your growing wholeness. Rest in that recognition. Let the archetypes be present without needing to master them all at once. They're patient. They've been waiting in the collective unconscious since consciousness first emerged. They'll wait as long as you need. The patterns continue. The journey continues. And you carry every archetype within you, ready to manifest when the moment calls for it. Breathe. Notice. Recognize. The archetypes are already here. Act 9. Gods, tyrants, and false authority. We've arrived at the throne room, the final confrontation, the ultimate enemy that rises at the end of every Persona game, massive and terrible and claiming dominion over humanity. But what are these beings, really? What are you fighting when you face a god? Jung viewed gods as archetypal projections, not literal beings dwelling in some supernatural realm, but psychic forces given form and name. Humanity creates gods by projecting archetypal patterns outward, giving them personality and narrative and power. The gods we worship, the gods we fear, are mirrors of our own psyche writ large, the human soul or mind manifested or magnified on a grand scale. They're real in their effects, real in their influence over consciousness, but their reality is psychological, not physical. They exist because we give them existence through our belief, our worship, our projection of psychic energy. And this is exactly what the Persona games present to you in their final acts. Final bosses represent collective psychic forces, not external threats that happen to attack, not aliens or demons from another dimension. They're humanity's own shadow, given form and power through collective consciousness. They're what emerges when enough psychic energy accumulates around a particular pattern, when the collective unconscious coalesces into something that acts with apparent independence. They're gods, yes, but gods born from human consciousness, sustained by human psychology, can only be defeated through changing that very consciousness. Look at Persona 3's ultimate revelation. Nyx embodies cosmic annihilation, death itself as an entity inevitable, unstoppable, the end of all things. You cannot defeat Nyx because you cannot defeat death. Death is real. Death will come. But here's the deeper truth the game reveals. Erebus reveals humanity's despair as the source. Nyx doesn't attack on her own initiative. She responds to a call to humanity's collective unconscious wish for death, for release, for an end to suffering. Erebus is the accumulation of every moment of despair, every death wish, every time someone thinks, I can't go on. This psychic mass calls to Nyx, summons annihilation, because some part of the collective unconscious has given up on life. The hero doesn't kill Nyx. He can't. Instead, he becomes a seal, a barrier between humanity's death wish and death itself. He holds the two apart through his own sacrifice, through his willingness to bear that burden forever. It's not a victory in the traditional sense. It's acceptance of reality. Death exists, combined with refusal to surrender to despair. It's choosing life even knowing life ends. It's the most Jungian resolution imaginable. You can't destroy the shadow, but you can prevent it from destroying you. Persona 4 presents a different false god, a different collective projection. Izanami rules through comforting illusions. A goddess who wants to give humanity what it seems to want. Freedom from the burden of truth, from the pain of seeing clearly. She offers a world where everyone can live in their preferred fantasy, where reality bends to desire, where you never have to face anything uncomfortable. It sounds almost kind, doesn't it? Protection from harsh truth. Permission to retreat into illusion. But Jung knew that such protection is poison. Fog symbolizes denial of truth. The fog that covers Inaba, that threatens to cover the world, is really humanity's collective unwillingness to see clearly, to face reality, to accept truth even when truth is painful. The fog is comfortable. It softens edges, hides what's ugly, lets you see only what you want to see. And that comfort is precisely what makes it deadly. Because consciousness requires seeing. Growth requires truth. Individuation requires facing reality as it is, not as you wish it were. The heroes reject Izanami's gift, not because they're masochistic, not because they enjoy pain. They reject it because they understand, consciously or intuitively, that truth is necessary. That illusion, no matter how comforting, is a prison. That humanity cannot grow, cannot become whole, while hiding from reality. They choose the harsh, clear light over the soft, concealing fog, knowing that choice will bring pain, but also possibility. Then comes Persona 5's villain, perhaps the most politically pointed of all. Yaldabaoth represents corrupted systems and control. a false god created by humanity's collective desire to be ruled, to be relieved of the burden of freedom and responsibility. People pray for someone to make decisions for them, to tell them what to do, to impose order from above. And those prayers accumulate, and a god emerges to answer them. A god who will control everything, who will make all choices, who will reduce humanity to obedient puppets. And he believes he's benevolent, believes he's giving people what they truly want, freedom from freedom itself. Jung would recognize this pattern immediately. It's the inflation of authority, the tyrant archetype manifesting at collective scale. The tyrant archetype shifts form across games. Sometimes it's death embraced too eagerly. Sometimes it's illusion accepted too readily. Sometimes it's control welcomed too gratefully. But it's always the same underlying pattern. Humanity's tendency to surrender autonomy, to seek escape from the difficulty of conscious, responsible existence, to project power outward rather than claim it within. And notice what these gods attack. Each god attacks hope differently. Nyx attacks hope by making death seem inevitable and immediate, by amplifying despair until it calls for annihilation. Izanami attacks hope by making truth seem too painful to bear, by offering comfortable illusions as the better alternative. Yaldabaoth attacks hope by making freedom seem too burdensome, by convincing people that control is preferable to autonomy. Different methods, same goal: to prevent humanity from choosing life, truth, and freedom. To prevent individuation. To keep consciousness from growing. Because here's what all these false gods offer. Each tempt escape from responsibility. You don't have to face death if annihilation comes for everyone. You don't have to confront hard truths if you can live in fog. You don't have to make difficult choices if a god makes them for you. Each one promises relief from the burden of conscious existence, from the weight of being fully human. And that promise is seductive precisely because being conscious is hard. Seeing clearly hurts. Making free choices means bearing the weight of consequences. The false gods offer to lift that weight, to let you rest, to spare you the struggle. The heroes reject easy solutions. They don't defeat the final boss and create a world without death, without pain, without difficulty. They defeat the false god and return to a world where death still exists, where truth still hurts, where freedom still demands responsibility. But it's real. It's conscious. It's human in the fullest sense. They choose the harder path because they understand, even if they can't articulate it, that the easier path leads to something worse than death. It leads to unconsciousness, to inhumanity, to existence without meaning or growth or possibility. These final battles are never just about power. You can't win through strength alone. You win through consciousness, through relationship, through the bonds you've built and the integration you've achieved. The false god is defeated not by superior force, but by superior consciousness, by humanity choosing to remain conscious, to stay responsible, to keep growing even knowing how hard that is. And the gods, in being defeated, reveal their true nature. They're not external enemies. They're humanity's own rejected possibilities, its shadow impulses given form and power. Defeat them, and they dissolve back into the collective unconscious, waiting for the next time humanity's despair or denial or desire for control accumulates enough psychic energy to call them forth again. The battle is never truly over. The false gods can always return if humanity stops choosing consciousness, stops facing truth, stops accepting responsibility. This is Jung's warning made mythic and playable. The greatest threat to human development doesn't come from outside. It comes from within, from our own unconscious, from our own refusal to face reality and claim our freedom. We create the gods that threaten us through our projections, our denials, our surrenders. And we defeat them the same way, by withdrawing projection, by facing truth, by reclaiming the autonomy we gave away. The tyrants shift form, but the pattern remains. The false gods promise comfort, but deliver spiritual death. And the only defense, the only real victory, is consciousness. Seeing clearly, choosing freely, accepting responsibility, building genuine connections, continuing to grow even when growth is painful. You face false gods in your own life, even if they don't look like Nyx or Izanami or Yaldabaoth. Anytime you're tempted to surrender consciousness, to accept a comfortable illusion, to let someone else make your choices, that a false god calling. Anytime you project power outward rather than claiming it within, you're feeding the tyrant archetype. Anytime you choose unconsciousness over awareness, you're answering the call towards spiritual death. The battle isn't in some metaphysical realm. It's here, now, in every choice between consciousness and unconsciousness, between truth and illusion, between freedom and control. The false gods aren't waiting at the end of a dungeon. They're waiting in every moment you're tempted to stop seeing, stop choosing, stop growing. And the victory isn't final. It's renewed daily, moment by moment, choice by choice. You defeat the false god today by choosing consciousness. Tomorrow, the choice comes again, and again, and again. This is the human condition Jung described. The constant work of remaining conscious, of facing reality, of accepting freedom with all its burden and beauty. Rest now, but remember, the false gods are always near, always calling, always offering escape. And the only answer that serves life, that serves growth, that serves your becoming whole, is the answer the heroes give. No, I choose consciousness. I choose truth. I choose freedom. I choose to remain human, to remain responsible, to continue growing no matter how hard it is. That choice is yours. Always yours. The false gods can't take it unless you give it. And every time you refuse their offer, you strike a blow for consciousness, for humanity, for the possibility of becoming whole. The throne room awaits. The false god calls, and you already know what your answer must be. Breathe. Choose. The battle continues, here in the quiet, in the choice to remain awake. Act 10. Choice, freedom, and growth. We've journeyed through shadow and met inner guides. We've faced false gods and explored collective depths. Now we arrive at something quieter, something more personal, something that might be the most important truth Jung ever articulated. There is no single path to wholeness. There is only your path. Jung believed individuation is personal and unique. He gave us maps, yes, described archetypes, outlined stages, identified patterns. But he always insisted that your journey toward wholeness would be uniquely yours. The archetypes are universal, but how they manifest in your life, which ones you struggle with most, what order you encounter them in, what your wholeness looks like when you achieve it, all of that is individual. Jung couldn't tell you who you should become. He could only help you discover who you actually are beneath all the personas, all the projections, all the unconscious patterns. And watch how the persona games honor this principle. Player choice reflects this philosophy, not in the superficial sense of choose your own adventure, but in something deeper. The game doesn't tell you which social links to pursue, which personas to fuse, which characters to spend time with, and how to respond in key moments. It presents you with possibilities and asks you to choose. And those choices matter. They shape your experience, your understanding, your path through the story. The mechanical systems reinforce this. Different paths unlock different personas. If you spend time with the hermit, you gain access to stronger hermit personas. If you neglect the tower, those personas remain weak. The game is telling you something profound. You become strong in the areas you engage with. You develop the parts of yourself you give attention to. There's no way to maximize everything, no way to achieve perfect completion of all paths simultaneously. You must choose. You must prioritize. You must decide what matters most to you, what calls to you, what your path requires. And here's the crucial insight embedded in this system. There's no single correct self. You could play through multiple times, make different choices each time, build different relationships, fuse different personas, and each playthrough would be valid. Each would be a different path toward wholeness. Jung would approve of this completely. He didn't believe in a universal template for the individual self. He believed in the self that emerges through honest engagement with your own psyche, your own challenges, your own unique constellation of gifts and shadows and circumstances. The archetypes provide structure, but not prescription. Archetypes recur, but change with consciousness. The hero archetype is always available, but what heroism means to you at 15 differs from what it means at 30, differs from what it means at 60. The lover archetype appears throughout your life, but its expression evolves as you mature, as you integrate shadow, as consciousness expands. The same archetype, but you relate to it differently because you've changed. You've grown. You become more conscious. And this brings us to perhaps the most important realization, the one that prevents the journey from becoming just another achievement to check off. Defeating a god doesn't end inner struggle. You've finished Persona 5, you've defeated Yaldabaoth, you've saved the world from false control. Credits roll. Game over. But in the narrative itself, in the logic of the story, the characters don't suddenly become perfect. They return to ordinary life. They still carry their shadows. They'll still face challenges. They'll still have to choose consciousness over unconsciousness, truth over illusion, freedom over escape. Because psychological growth isn't a destination. It's not something you achieve once and then you're done. It's a process, ongoing, lifelong. Jung knew this. He was in his 80s and still discovering new aspects of his own psyche, still facing new challenges, still growing. The work never ends. It just deepens. It becomes more subtle, more refined, more conscious. The games gesture toward this understanding in their endings. Life goes on. The characters graduate or move forward. The Velvet Room remains accessible. The archetypes haven't vanished. Archetypes return in everyday life, not as monsters in dungeons, but as patterns in relationships, challenges at work, internal conflicts, moments of choice. The Emperor archetype appears when you must provide structure or deal with authority. The Fool appears when you face something new and uncertain. The Death appears when transformation demands you let something go. You don't fight them anymore, not like you did in the dungeons, but you still engage with them. And this is where real growth shows itself. Growth means relating to them differently each time. The first time you encounter your shadow, you might deny it completely. The second time, you might acknowledge it but feel ashamed. The third time, you might accept it with some grace. The fourth time, you might even work with it consciously, recognizing the gift hidden in what you once rejected. Each encounter is an opportunity, not to finally defeat the archetype, but to relate to it more consciously, more skillfully, more wholly. The tower will collapse your false structures again and again throughout your life. But each time, you can rebuild more authentically. The devil will tempt you toward unhealthy attachments again and again. But each time, you can recognize the pattern sooner, choose freedom more quickly. This is what individuation actually looks like in practice. Not a final achievement, but a deepening relationship with the archetypal patterns that structure human experience. Not defeating the psyche, but learning to work with it, to dance with it, to let it guide you toward wholeness through whatever challenges it presents. And your choices matter in this process. Not because there are right and wrong choices in some absolute sense, but because they're your choices. They shape your path. They determine which parts of yourself you develop, which lessons you learn, which challenges you face. You can't walk every path simultaneously. You must choose. And in choosing, you discover something essential. Who you actually are, beneath all the should-bes and could-bes and might-have-beens. Jung believed that the individual person isn't perfect. They're whole. They've integrated shadow, acknowledged their multiplicity, withdrawn major projections, developed relationship with the self. But they still have flaws, still make mistakes, still struggle. The difference is consciousness. They're aware of their patterns. They choose their responses rather than reacting unconsciously. They take responsibility for their psyche and its effects on the world. The games can't make you individuated. They can only invite you into the process, give you a taste of what it means, plant seeds that might grow if you water them. The real work happens in your life, in your choices, in your willingness to face shadow and build genuine connections and keep growing even when it's hard. But here's what the games can do. What they do brilliantly. They make individuation playable, visible, experienceable. They let you feel what it's like to face your shadow and accept it. They let you experience the power that comes from integration. They let you build relationships that make you stronger. They let you choose freely and see those choices matter. They let you defeat false gods through consciousness rather than force. And maybe, just maybe, they inspire you to begin or continue your own journey, to face your own shadow, to withdraw your own projections, to build your own genuine connections, to make your own choices consciously, to become, gradually and imperfectly, more fully yourself. There is no correct self. There is only yourself, waiting to be discovered, integrated, expressed. The archetypes will keep appearing, offering lessons, presenting challenges, inviting growth. Your task isn't to defeat them finally. Your task is to keep relating to them more consciously, more skillfully, more wholly. The journey doesn't end. The work continues. The archetypes return. And each time, you have the opportunity to engage differently, to grow deeper, to become more integrated. This is individuation, not a destination, but a direction. Not perfection, but wholeness. Not the end of struggle, but the transformation of struggle into growth. Your choices are yours. Your path is yours. Yourself is yours to discover and express and become. Jung gave us maps, yes. The Persona games illustrate those maps beautifully. But the journey itself? That's all you. It always has been. It always will be. Sit in that freedom, in that responsibility. Rest in the knowledge that growth is possible, always possible, one choice at a time, one shadow faced at a time, one connection built at a time. The fool stands at the cliff edge, ready to step into the unknown. That fool is you. That journey is yours. And every choice you make, every archetype you engage with, every moment of consciousness you choose, takes you one step further on the path toward becoming wholly, finally, beautifully yourself. Breathe. Choose. Grow. The journey continues, yours alone, but held within patterns shared by all humanity. The individual and the collective, forever intertwined, forever calling you deeper into the work of becoming whole. The door remains open. The velvet room waits. The archetypes are patient. And you, right now, in this moment, are exactly where you need to be on the journey. The work continues tomorrow, and the tomorrow after that. And every day, you choose consciousness, choose growth, choose to keep walking the path toward your true self. The game taught you the patterns. Now life invites you to live them. The choice, as always, is yours. The final act. The big picture. Why it endures. Let's look at the whole picture, at why this connection between a video game series and a Swiss psychiatrist's life work matters. Why it endures. Why it resonates years after you've played, decades after Jung wrote. Persona treats psychology as an active force, not something abstract you study in textbooks, not something passive that simply describes how you feel. Psychology in Persona is power. It's literal, tangible, immediate. Your mental state determines your strength. Your integration determines your abilities. Your relationships generate force that changes reality. The games take Jung's insight that psychic reality is as real as physical reality, perhaps more so, and make it the core mechanic. Psychology isn't just theory. It's the engine that drives everything. And this creates a fundamental shift in how you perceive reality itself. Inner images shape outer worlds. The dungeons you explore are literally made of someone's psyche. The enemies you fight are literally psychological complexes given form. The transformations you witness happen because consciousness changed. The games don't just tell you that inner and outer are connected. They show you, make you experience it, make it undeniable. Change the inner world and the outer world transforms in response. This is Jung's vision made concrete and playable. At the heart of this system lies something remarkable, something that transcends language and culture. Archetypes form a shared symbolic language. The fool, the magician, the priestess, the empress. Death, the tower, the star, the moon. These aren't arbitrary. They're a vocabulary, a way of naming psychological patterns that everyone, everywhere, can recognize at some level. You don't need to study tarot to feel the meaning of death, the transformation, the necessary ending. You don't need Jung's books to understand the fool's innocence and potential. The games reinforce this understanding through repetition. Recurring mythic personas reinforce this language. Game after game, certain figures appear. Orpheus and his descent, Izanagi and his creative power, Arsene and his rebellious theft. These aren't just cool references to mythology. They're teaching you to read symbols, to recognize patterns, to understand that the old stories are maps of psychological truth. When you summon persona after persona, each one drawn from myth and legend, you're building fluency in the symbolic language Jung spent his life translating. And something remarkable happens through this process. Players learn to read symbols intuitively. You might not be able to explain why a particular persona feels right for a situation. You might not consciously understand the archetypal pattern at play, but you feel it. You recognize it. The games train your symbolic consciousness. Wake up that part of your mind that thinks in images and patterns rather than words and logic. They activate what Jung called symbolic thinking, the language of the unconscious itself. This is educational in the deepest sense. The series teaches self-reflection through play, not through lectures, not through moralizing, but through experience. You face a shadow and you think about your own shadows. You witness a character's growth and you consider your own growth. You make choices and you reflect on what those choices reveal about you. The game becomes a mirror and playing becomes an act of self-examination. You're not just learning about Jung's psychology. You're learning about yourself through Jung's framework. Because here's the crucial difference between Persona and almost any other Jung-inspired media. Jung's ideas are not just referenced, they are lived. The games don't just drop Jung's name or use his terminology superficially. They embody his principles. They translate his insights into systems you interact with, narratives you experience, choices you make. You don't learn about facing your shadow by reading about it. You face a shadow character and must decide whether to accept or reject it. You don't learn about individuation theoretically. You live through a year-long journey of integration and growth. In doing this, the series achieves something Jung himself might have celebrated. Persona modernizes depth psychology. It takes ideas from the early 20th century, concepts that can feel abstract or outdated, and shows they're alive, relevant, immediate. It proves that Jung's framework can speak to contemporary audiences, can address modern anxieties, and can provide meaning in a world very different from the one he knew. The games are a bridge, carrying Jung's wisdom forward into new contexts, new generations, new forms. And they do something even more important. They reframe how we think about psychological struggle. It reframes inner conflict as growth potential. The shadow isn't just a problem to eliminate. It's potential to integrate. The painful confrontation isn't just suffering to endure. It's the crucible of transformation. Every internal conflict, every psychological crisis becomes an opportunity, not for toxic positivity, not for denying that pain is real, but for recognizing that pain can be initiation, that struggle can be the path to something greater. Pain becomes initiation, not failure. When you're depressed, when you're anxious, when you're facing your worst fears, these aren't signs you're broken beyond repair. They're often signs that transformation is trying to happen, that the psyche is pushing you toward growth you've been avoiding. Jung understood this. The games portray it. Your darkest moments in these games often precede your greatest breakthroughs. The pain is the price of transformation, not evidence of permanent damage. And the specific patterns Jung identified, the ones that seem so threatening, are revealed as allies waiting to be claimed. Shadows become allies. The part of you that you rejected, that you pushed down, that you were ashamed of contains power you need. When you integrate it, when you accept that is also me, it stops fighting you and starts fighting for you. The monster becomes the persona. The enemy becomes the strength. Masks become tools, not prisons. The personas you wear in social life don't have to be lies that hollow you out. They could be conscious choices, skillful adaptations, ways of navigating different contexts while remaining rooted in your authentic self. The wildcard ability is really the ability to wear masks consciously, to shift between them fluidly while never losing touch with the core underneath. Gods become questions, not rulers. The false gods that threaten you aren't undefeatable cosmic forces. They're projections, questions the psyche is asking. Will you surrender to despair? Will you hide an illusion? Will you give away your freedom? Each god is really a question about how you'll respond to life's difficulties. And defeating them means answering. I choose consciousness. I choose truth. I choose responsibility. The gods have no power you don't give them through unconsciousness. All of this adds up to a fundamental transformation in how you relate to your inner world. The psyche becomes something you can explore, not a mystery forever closed to you, not a black box you can never understand, but territory you can map, depths you can descend into, forces you can engage with. Dangerous, yes. Difficult, absolutely. But explorable, knowable, workable. The velvet room is always there. The inner guides are always available. The archetypes are always waiting to be engaged with. And this is why the series endures, why people come back to it years later, why it means more as you age and face your own psychological challenges. Because Persona is Jungian psychology told as an interactive myth. It's not an adaptation or commentary. It's a translation. It takes Jung's insights and makes them playable, experienceable, memorable. It does what myths have always done. It makes invisible psychological truths visible through story and symbol and dramatic encounter. You might forget the specific mechanics. You might forget plot details or character names. But you don't forget the feeling of facing your shadow and accepting it. You don't forget the power of genuine connection. You don't forget that growth comes through confronting what you'd rather avoid. You don't forget that you contain multitudes, that wholeness is possible, that the work of becoming yourself is the most important work you'll ever do. The series plants seeds. Some germinate immediately. Some take years. But once you've experienced individuation through these games, once you've lived through the process, even in fictional form, something in you knows that transformation is possible, knows that shadow work is necessary, knows that consciousness matters, knows that you're not just a fixed thing but a process, a becoming, a journey toward wholeness. Jung wanted to help people become conscious, become whole, become themselves. He used therapy, used writing, used any method available to communicate his understanding of the psyche. The Persona series is another method, a modern one, a playful one, but no less serious in its intention or profound in its effect. It endures because the truth it's telling is timeless. The archetypes don't change. The process of individuation doesn't change. The human need for meaning, for wholeness, for understanding oneself, that doesn't change. The games found a way to communicate this truth that speaks to people who would never pick up Jung's collected works, who might never enter therapy, who might never consciously engage with depth psychology. They made the invisible visible. They made the abstract concrete. They made the psychological playable. And in doing so, they gave millions of people a map, a vocabulary, a framework for understanding their own inner lives. They taught self-reflection through the language of play. They honored Jung's vision while translating it into something new, something that could reach new audiences, new generations, new minds seeking understanding. This is why it matters. This is why it endures. Not because of graphics or mechanics or story twists, though those help, but because it touches something real, something deep, something that every human being carries, the possibility of becoming whole. The journey from fragmentation to integration. The path from unconsciousness to awareness. The work of becoming finally and fully yourself. Jung gave us the map. Persona made it playable. And you, if you let it, can make it real. In your life, in your choices, in your willingness to face shadow, build connection, withdraw projection, choose consciousness, and keep walking the path toward wholeness. The game ends when you turn off the console, but the journey it depicts continues in you, if you choose to continue it. The velvet room exists within your own psyche, always accessible. The archetypes are always present, waiting to be engaged with. The choice between consciousness and unconsciousness is always available, moment by moment, day by day. Persona endures because Jung's truth endures, because the psyche is real, because wholeness is possible, because the journey matters, and because sometimes a video game can teach you more about yourself than 1,000 textbooks, can make you feel truths that you might otherwise never encounter, can plant seeds that grow into genuine transformation. The series is a gift. Jung's work was a gift. And what you do with these gifts, how you let them shape your journey, what you become through engaging with them, that's your gift to yourself and to the world. Let all settle. Let the connections exist without needing to grasp them all. The journey has been long. The depths are real, and you've walked them here in this quiet space, here in this long night of gentle exploration. The door stands open. The work continues, and you are ready, have always been ready, to become wholly and beautifully yourself. Sleep now. Dream as symbols. Let the archetypes move through you, and wake tomorrow a little more conscious, a little more whole, a little more yourself than you were before. The fool's journey continues. Your journey continues. And Jung and Persona both whisper the same truth. Wholeness is possible, the path is real, and you are worthy of becoming who you truly are. Rest, breathe, be. The story has been told. The connection was revealed. And now, finally, gently, we let you sleep. We'll meet again soon in the velvet room of shared understanding, where Jung and Persona and your own inner wisdom all converge. Until next time, good night.